Hello, my name is BJ, and this is my story. I was born in Denison, Texas, and I grew up in a town in North Louisiana called Monroe. In Monroe, I lived with my mother and my father and my sister. My mom and my dad, during the first part of their lives, were very good parents, and I had a great relationship with my sister. But as time started to unravel, some things happened that really started to mess with me and change my life in a direction that I was not ready for, nor anybody should have to go through. When I was younger, my mom took us over to a friend's house. Now, this friend was a family friend, and my mom would visit with the parents, and I would go into the back room with their son, and he would basically, hang out with me, and we'd play video games. Well, the video games weren't the only thing that happened in that room. As time went on, we would come over time and time again, and this young man, who I don't know where he is right now today, but he would begin to do things to me. I didn't understand them at the time. It's hard for me as a young man to grasp my mind around what was happening to me. But he began to take me, and he would pull his pants down, and touch me inappropriately, and he would tell me to do the same to him. And he told me that it's all good, it's perfectly normal, don't worry about anything, and don't tell anybody. But this is normal, this is our secret. This went on for a little while, until finally I mentioned it to my parents, and my mom would not let us hang out with him anymore. As time went on, I still experienced the normal childhood, and I still felt loved and accepted by my mom and my dad. Well, my mom took us over to my aunt's house. My aunt had a son. And as I was over there, sleeping and spending the night on the couch, he would come into the living room every week for about a month and pull my pants down and begin to touch me inappropriately and do things to me. At this point, I began to realize this is not normal, and I began to question what's wrong with me, and why is this happening, and why is he doing this to me? Of course, he was much older, and at the time I was scared of him, and so I didn't say anything until later, and I told my mother, and my mother found out about it, and we weren't allowed to hang out with this cousin anymore. My life did go on from here, and as I went through grade school and middle school and into high school, I began to notice some things when I went to school. I noticed that I was different from the other kids. I didn't wear good shoes like they did. I didn't have the nice jeans, the nice shirt, the designer brands, and I didn't quite fit in. I was a little different. Because of these differences, I began to seek different friends, what people would probably call outcasts. These are the guys that didn't fit into the mold. These are the guys that were different like me. Well, something happened during this time. I formed a friendship with a guy named Brad. He became my best friend. He introduced me to some of his other friends who were some pretty wild guys. But from what I've already gone through and what I've already been through and where I was at the time, to me, I didn't care who my friends were. It was just the fact that I had friends. So I was hanging out with these guys and my friend Brad, and one day we decided to go out into the woods and play a game. And the game is that they go running into the woods, and someone tries to find them. You search for them. It's kind of like hide and seek. Well, I was the one chosen to do the searching, and they all went out into the woods, and I was able to find a few of them. And as the game progressed, one of them is still missing. And I heard this guy holler out in pain. He was a friend who's still missing. I heard him holler, and he started to get closer and closer, and he was yelling and he was cursing. And this guy was considerably older than me. He was 2 or 3 years older than me, and he came up to me, and his leg was cut open. He was bleeding, and I asked him. I said, "What's wrong?" And he says, "I'm hurt. And I said, "What happened?" And he looked at me and he said, "You did this to me." And I was confused. I didn't know what he was talking about. And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about, man. I didn't do this to you, man. We're playing hide and seek, man. You're running through the woods, your leg probably got cut." And he's like, No, it's your fault that this happened, because I was running from you, and that's why it happened." So I began to plead my case. I'm like, I didn't do this to you. You know, this is why this happened. But he didn't want to hear anything that I had to say. So he decided that since I hurt him, he was going to hurt me. And him and his two other friends, they grabbed me and took me out deeper into the woods. And while we were in the woods, two of his friends, one grabbed one arm and the other grabbed the other arm. And this guy picked up a stick and he says, "You need to learn a lesson." I was very confused at this time, and I looked to my friend Brad. Brad was a little bit older than me, maybe a year, and he was a lot stronger than I was. And I said, "Brad, are you going to help me?" Brad looked at me and he didn't say anything. He just lowered his head and he walked off. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I was alone in the woods with three guys that I barely knew, and my best friend walked away from me. Then this guy took a stick, ripped my shirt in half, and began to hit me across the chest repeatedly. Over my chest, over my stomach, my legs. He was laughing. He thought it was funny. Me, I thought it was anything but funny. And they finally let me go. I began to cry and I took off running. I didn't understand what was going on. I was confused. I ran into my friend Brad's house. He opened the door. I ran into and jumped on his bed, and I started to cry. I didn't understand. I was confused. Brad at first tried to console me and "It's going to be all right, man. It's all good. Sorry this happened to you." This happened for about 5 minutes, and then his tone changed. And he began to tell me, "You just need to get over it. Quit crying. Be a man. Grow up." And he told me to leave. So I left, and I was confused, and I went home. The moments that followed, the days that followed, the years that followed would bring a lot of confusion and darkness into my life. Me and Brad's friendship grew further and further apart after this incident, and I felt more distant from people than I'd ever felt before. But I still had my family. My mom still loved me, my dad still loved me, and I had a sister that I was close to. So as time went on, as it always does, I noticed some things about my mother and my father. They began to fight a lot. They began to argue. They began to see things differently. And my mom and my dad decided to move to Texas. And while we were in Texas, the fighting continued. And my mother and my father talked about leaving each other, separating. I'd never heard this term divorce before, but it began to be rolled around in their conversation. And I began to tell myself, this can't be happening. This isn't real. They're going to get back together. This is not my reality. But as time went on, I realized that this was going to become the reality. And it was confusing me more and more. I pleaded with them to try to stay together. I talked to them. But it was a course that had been set. So as time went on, my mom and my dad, they fought more and more. And my father started to lie about my mom, started to tell lies about her. Your mom's a whore. Your mom's no good. Your mom's cheating on me. And he began to just express say bitter things about my mother. And I was confused. But because I loved my dad so much, and I at that time in my life, I leaned more towards being a daddy's boy, that I began to believe him. And I began to get really angry at my mom. And I began to say some of the same things that my dad had said about her to her. Of course, this hurt my mom. I don't think at that time she really knew what to say. And I bet if she could go back in time, she might put new words in her mouth to say what she needed to say to me. But time went on, and my dad became increasingly more and more distant from my mother, until one day he decided he was going to leave. Now, my mom and my dad were not separated or divorced at this time, so it really didn't make any sense what he did next. He took me and my sister, he loaded us up, and he just drove straight to Louisiana. So basically, my father kidnapped me and my sister, took us away from our mom. My mother loved us so deeply at that time that she said it hurt her so much that she said, "I didn't want you kids going through any more pain, any more struggles." So she said, "I just let it happen." She said, "I knew that your dad was going to do what he was going to do. So I just let it happen. During this time, my life became even more confusing. My father became more distant. He began to physically abuse me, and he began to emotionally and mentally abuse me also. To go into some of the abuse, I just remember there were times that my dad would give me normal discipline, like a spanking or a grounding, but he would add more to that. I remember one time that my dad would hit me across the side of the head with his hand, kick me when I fell down, and when I would be in the corner telling my dad, please stop, he would kick me over and over again. And he would punch me on the top of the head. And he'd say, you need to listen to me. I'm your dad. I didn't understand at this time that this was beyond normal discipline. Because in my mind, I loved my father. And I wanted more than anything to be close to my father. And if it meant me taking some abuse, I was going to take it. So I took it. After this happened, it began to go from physical abuse to emotional abuse. My dad began to tell me that I was no good. My dad began to tell me that he wished I wouldn't have been born. And during this time of confusion, I remember one time in particular that I was outside. And I would always play football with my dad. I remember we would always play football. But after we were moved to Louisiana by my father, that stopped. Everything stopped. And I remember standing outside and throwing a football from one side of the parking lot to the other, thinking in my mind, I wish my dad would just come play football with me. I wish my dad would come and hang out with me. I wish my father would spend time with me. But as I said, more and more, he became distant. But in all this, what was really confusing about this distance my dad had, he was always tell me that I love you, son. You know that I love you. I didn't understand it. I couldn't comprehend it. If you love me, why would you abuse me? Why would you hurt me? Why would you treat me like this? Why would you push me away? Why won't you come outside and throw the football? My dad began to do some very, very strange things. He would call preachers over and tell them that I was demon possessed, that I had a demon because I wasn't doing what he told me to do. He would call the police on me several times and say that I was a rebellious son and that I was causing trouble. And none of it was true. I would explain to the officers, he's lying. I would tell the preacher, I am a good kid. My father's lying. I didn't understand that at that point in my dad's life, what he was going through, the pain he was going through in his own mind, and he was taking it out on me. I was just confused. So as time went on, about 3 years later, my mother called. And my dad gave us back to my mom. After reuniting with my mom, the level of anger, hurt, and confusion increased. I began to fight with my mom a lot. I began to tell her stuff like, you let these things happen to us. You let dad take us. And the only real release from the confusion and the hurt and the anger that I was experiencing was to play football. It was an outlet. I felt like I was part of a team. I felt accepted. I felt like my life could go on. But the thing about anger, hurt, and confusion is that if you don't deal with those things, they come back again until you fully deal with them in some shape or form. And I began to ask questions to my mom. I began to ask questions to my family members. Questions they didn't have the answers to. And I began to question God. Did God really exist? Is God real? I mean, when I was younger, I grew up in church. It was my normal life as a child. But as I'd gotten older, the idea of God letting something and things happen to people like this, it confused me. It made me think, if God lets these things happen to me, then he must not be a good God. And I began to say that God doesn't exist. As life went on also, I began to notice that my unpopularity and my fitting in hadn't changed. I still didn't fit in. I still was unpopular. I still felt like I was a little weird, different than other kids. And I began to get depressed. I didn't understand why. I just knew I was sad a lot. And with that sadness also came the anger. And I began to lash out at my mom. My mom would ask me stuff like, "What did your dad do to you? Tell me. What's going on? Why are you angry at me? Talk to me, talk to me." And I didn't know how to talk to her. I didn't know how to express it because all I knew was what my dad had told me, that my mom was no good, that my mom was a whore, that my mom was a cheater. And I began to blame her again and point my finger at her and say, "You're all these things." And I began to fight physically with my mom. I began to push her and sometimes my mom would have to fight back, slapping and punching me so that I wouldn't try to man up to her. And I don't blame her. I was an angry kid. So as life went on, I also began to think about, why am I here? No one cares about me. I'm not popular. My mom doesn't understand me. And no one understands what I've gone through. No one can relate to my story. I began to think, why do I need to be here? Maybe I should end this. I remember one time I was in my room and it all came out like a flood. I began to cry. I began to yell and scream. And all that hurt and all that pain, everything that had happened to me, the confusion of it, began to seep out of me, began to come out of me. And I was confused and I hit my hands on the ground and I banged my head into the carpet and I said, "Why has this happened to me?" And I looked up to heaven and I said, "God, you don't care about me. You never did. Because if you did, you wouldn't have let this stuff happen to me." And I began to hit the wall, punching holes in the wall. Got angrier and angrier. It was all coming out, all the anger, all the hurt, all the frustration. And my mom busted in the room, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I was like, "Get away from me. You don't care. You don't love me. Leave me alone." My mom tried to understand what was going on with me that time. And I came out of the room, still angry, still yelling, and I said, "God, if you exist, if you're real, and if you care, prove yourself to me." And I began to premeditate. I began to make plans ahead of time to kill myself because I didn't figure that my life was worth anything. I wasn't worth anything to anybody because of all the stuff that had happened to me, because of my dad rejecting me, because of people at school rejecting me, and because no one could understand my pain or relate to me. I felt like it's useless to live anymore. What's the point? It's just living with more hurt and pain and depression every day. So I made a vow to God, and I said, "God, if you care about me, if you love me, if you're real," which I doubt seriously, "then you need to show up." And I made plans, and I said, because this weekend I'm going to end my life. And I had it all planned out. I said, I'm going to go to this bridge in Howe, Texas, and I'm going to jump off of the bridge into the water below head first. I figured in my mind that if I broke my neck, if I hit my head just right and broke my neck, I would drown. It would be over quick, and I would be done. And then I could get the answers to my questions. Does God really exist? Because I would find out. So the week progressed, and I met this man. He came into my life out of the blue. This guy said to me, "Hey man, you want to come over to my house and hang out with my family?" This guy didn't know me. He didn't know my past. He didn't know what I had been through, but he just accepted me. It's something that I hadn't felt in a long time. I mean, I felt accepted by my mom, but I felt she just didn't understand. And I still thought that those things my dad said about her were true, and it caused a wall between us. So I accepted his invitation. I figured, why not go ahead and hang out with this dude. It doesn't matter anyway. I'm going to kill myself at the end of the week anyway. So I went over to his house, hung out with his family, ate dinner. And during the course of that time, this guy, he didn't judge me. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He just accepted me. He wanted to know what kind of things I was into and what I liked. And I told him. And he just, to me, I look back at it, he just wanted to be my friend. He didn't know where I was from, but he knew, he could probably see there was something about me that needed, a part of my life that needed some friendship and love and acceptance. So as the days progressed, I would come over to his house just about every day. And as it approached the weekend, I began to think about how I was going to end my life. But I enjoyed that time hanging out with him. I enjoyed it. And he asked me, it was the Friday, Saturday is when I was planning to kill myself. He asked me, he said, BJ, I need some help moving some stuff on Saturday. He lived in a trailer park and he wanted to move some stuff from an old trailer to his new trailer. So I was like, this kind of ruins my plans. But I went ahead and did it anyway because, it would be over soon. That was kind of the way I was looking at it. And as I was helping him on a Saturday night, my mind couldn't get off of that bridge and that it's about to be over. So as we were moving the boxes, we began to move one by one. I noticed something. He had picked up a box. We were almost done. He picked up a box and he looked at me. And he started to cry. And I thought to myself, I was like, oh no. This can't be happening. It can't get any worse. What have I done? I've done something wrong. And he just began to weep uncontrollably. I asked, what's wrong? He wouldn't answer. I said, what's going on, man? Are you okay? And he's like, he wouldn't say anything. And he had this box of breakables. And he just dropped it. The box hit the floor. Glass went everywhere. It crashed. He put his hands over his face and began to continue to weep uncontrollably. And I looked at him. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, I don't know what this is. It's never happened to me before. But I feel like God is speaking to me right now. And I've got to tell you this. And he just kept saying, I've never experienced this before. This may not even be real. But I got to tell you it. I feel like it's God. I was speechless. And as he began to talk to me, he looked me in the eye and he said, man, I know you want to end your life. God told me to tell you that your life is worth something, that you're worth something to him. And then he heard your cry. He heard your prayer in your bedroom. When you said, if you really exist, prove yourself to me. He heard it. He heard every word that you said. He's seen all your pain. He's seen all your struggles. He knows what you've been through. And he wants to tell you that he is real and that he loves you. And then if you'll just open up your heart to him, he'll help you. He'll start to ease the suffering and pain you've been through. He'll take away the anger and the depression and the confusion. In my mind, when he said these words, there was no doubting that God was real. There was no going back. There was no turning back. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that God was real at that moment. No one else could have heard that prayer. I never knew this guy. And I looked at him. I started to weep. I started to cry. I began to question. But my questions were not questions of confusion anymore. They were more of, how do I get to know this God that has heard my cry and reached down from heaven, coming into my world? And I accepted Jesus into my life at that moment. I said, yes, whatever it takes, I'll do it. I'll accept you, Jesus. I'll do it. What do I need to do? And he just told me it's simple, man. all you got to do is say this prayer with me. And I said the prayer with him. And that night I became a new creation. I became a new person. I felt the biggest weight lift off of my shoulders. It's almost like I had been carrying huge bags of rotting trash on my shoulders, and they were gone. I accepted God. And as I left that trailer that night, and as this man walked out of my life, I knew something was different. You know, they always tell you the grass is greener, the flowers smell better, you know, everything's more beautiful. It was night, and the stars did look a little brighter. Something was totally different. And my life went on. And as I had went through this, God began to take my life and began to repair these broken pieces. He renewed my relationship with my mom. I came to the place where I was able to accept what had happened, and that my father had not only done terrible things to me, but had also done terrible things to others. My dad, during the course of that time that we were with my mom, he went to jail. And after going to jail, my father passed away. There was one last thing that God needed to do inside of me, because I knew him as the God of the universe, the creator of the universe, the one you read about in the Bible, but I didn't know him as my father. I didn't know that there could be a relationship with him that was closer than anything I'd ever experienced. And I remember one night on the streets of Nashville, Tennessee, I had traveled with some friends of mine and we were playing music, and I felt this emptiness, this distance from God. I was jealous of my friends because their family was close. Their mom and dad were still together. There was still a sense of family with them, and mine was broken. And I said, God, why did you let this happen to me? I know that you love me, but why did you let this happen to me? And I just began to scream out in the streets of Nashville, God, why did you let me go through all this hurt? Why did you let me go through all this pain and this confusion? You came into my life, but you hadn't fixed me yet. You've taken off the load of angers and the confusion and just the hurt, but I still hurt, God. I still need to be fixed. I need you to repair me. And as I prayed that prayer, the heavens were silent. I didn't hear anything. I didn't feel God's presence, nothing. And I wept, and I cried out, and I dried my face off, and I walked back inside the hotel room where we had been staying. And my friend was there. He had been looking for me. He had seen me wander off, and this wasn't the first time that I had just walked off from everybody and not told anybody where I was going. I would do it sometimes because I would feel this hurt and this separation and this confusion. I felt broken, and I didn't know how to be fixed, and I wanted God to fix me. And my friend looked me in the eye as I began to cry again, and I told him what I was feeling, and he said, man, you're never going to have what I have. You're never going to have a mom and a dad that are together. You're never going to have the close relationship with your siblings that you want because you're on a different path. It's not going to happen. I thought those were really hurtful words to say to me, but in all reality, those were healing words. And I just remember that I began to feel something I never felt before. A hope and a sense of this, he's so right. And he told me, man, but you can be the difference. You can be the one that makes the difference for your family in the future. That propelled me to seek God as my Father, to know him in a way that I'd never known him before. And as I started to seek that relationship, I began to hear God speak to me. Things began to happen in my life. I began to feel the fatherhood of God like I've never felt before. And my journey with God, I think, really started there. My new life started back when I got saved, but the journey started there, where I finally said, you know what? I'm accepting this. That even if, as it says, if my mother and my father forsake me, you are with me. If heaven and earth pass away, you're there. And I began to, over the next few years, begin to feel a sense of security, that he always cares. He's always with me, that he's my loving Father. And as my life has gone on, it's been a journey to discover more and more that relationship. So if you're listening to this and you don't know that relationship with God, I'm not going to preach some religious sermon. I'm just going to say you need to get to know Him in this way as your Father. That no matter what hurts and hang-ups, whatever confusion, no matter what anger you've been through, no matter what strife you have in your family, your home, or in your mind, that God can take away all that. He can remove it all. And He can begin to show you His love in ways that you never imagined. He wants to talk to you, and He wants you to talk to Him.